Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Josh Carr Show. In this episode, I sit down with Richard Jones, who is a registered nurse and is helping students, or young people rather, get through drug addiction. He gives me a little bit of insight into some of the current events and kind of what's going on with fentanyl at the border, as well as what he is doing to combat the drug epidemic. Really quick before we get to him, I do want to talk about the sponsor of this podcast, History on the Rocks podcast. It's hard to understand the political landscape of the world if we don't understand history. That's why I've partnered with History on the Rocks, a really fantastic podcast that I listen to in order to learn new things and gain perspective on history. You can check them out on pretty much any podcast provider, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. These are just history things that no one taught you in school. And as a lot of you know that listen to me, academia kind of has their own version of what happens. History on the Rocks has a very entertaining way of learning conversational kind of history. It's a great addition to your morning and evening routine so you can get a little bit more about history without having to sift through boring books. So go check out History on the Rocks podcast right now. And welcome to the show, Richard Jones. So everybody, Richard, I should start with you. I have some questions for you kind of about your Second Start business and what you're doing with that.
Certainly.
But really quick, before we go into that, I do want to talk just a little bit about, since I talk about current events and the news, right. I want to talk about some of the current issues that Americans are facing and maybe get your perspective as as a registered nurse and just as a business owner. The first one, and one that I think my audience is really concerned with, is the use of fentanyl. So fentanyl is coming across the southern border at an unprecedented rate. Have you had any experiences with this drug, or do you think that the prevalence of this drug is a concern in America, or are there other concerns they're greater in your mind?
Well, I do have a lot of experience with the drug. I currently do some part-time work at a drug and alcohol rehab, so I talk to and treat and see people with fentanyl use on a multiple times daily basis. I am not so much concerned with fentanyl as it's fentanyl, because to me, if they ever were to do something like getting rid of fentanyl, they'll just replace it with something else. It's not so much the drug. The borders mean nothing, and they never, ever did. It's the people's need for these mind and body altering substances that drive it. It's not it's silly to blame the Chinese, because if it wasn't the Chinese, it would be the Americans or the Russians or whoever made it. Through our history of time, we have came up with certain things to numb our sense of reality. So I don't get too much involved with that. It's more the person and what is their need for it that excites me. As far as where it comes from and the border and what all over, that's just blah, 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 blah. That's really what that is. It's not really addressing our problem, That's the way I feel about it.
Sure. So just a follow-up on that. So in your experience then, are there the people that you've worked with, is it mostly that they have been actively, willingly taking fentanyl, as opposed to those kind of fringe cases where people are taking maybe another drug and fentanyl happens to be in it? Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's both. In other words, you see so many people, like, for example, if they come in and say, well, I'm using heroin. Well, 9.5 out of 10 people, there's fentanyl. When you test them, there's fentanyl in the heroin. So, and sometimes they're surprised, at least maybe last year or a year before they were surprised. Now no one's surprised anymore, because when you look at the heroin, not only is there fentanyl in it, there's benzodiazepines in it, there's barbiturates in it mixed up. I've very rarely seen anyone who said, oh my goodness gracious, there was fentanyl in my heroin. I can't do that heroin anymore. That just doesn't happen. Nobody cares what the substance is. Not really. I mean, they're taking horse tranquilizers inside the heroin, inside the fentanyl. They don't care how dangerous the substance is. Their need to disengage is greater than their worry about what the substance is.
So along those lines, I wanted to ask you what is driving that need to kind of disconnect from the world around them? In your opinion, what is that driving for? So is it like a lack of purpose in their life?
Exactly, a lack of purpose. We have a lack of purpose, and when you multiply that with our society's need to disengage people, and I don't want to go off on a gaming, cell phone technology tangent, but that certainly didn't help any. It's more of our perceived need to destroy ourselves in so many ways because of we have a lack of this and a lack of that and a lack of this and a lack of that, and these things have multiplied greatly over the last so many years. And as technology has increased, as the ability to make new and better and stronger and more efficient drugs, meaning efficient, meaning that, it takes very little money for them to make a lot of damaging drugs. Back in the old days, you had to grow so much opiate and so much, opiate and make heroin. And it was a time. It took time and money to do that. Now these drugs are a lot cheaper to make, a lot easier to distribute, a lot easier to get to people. So it's much more efficient. And so our technology that destroys us and takes our young people's minds is more efficient also. Now each and every person, regardless of their status, has a cell phone or two, Has cell phones made us any better or stronger? Maybe a couple of us. But for the most part, it's done a lot of damage. So we've just got so many things coming downhill on our young people. There's so many things. It's kind of tough.
So is it mostly young people then? Obviously, I don't know. When I go to play, I live in a place where thankfully there aren't that many people kind of out in the open that are struggling with drug addictions. There probably are plenty, behind closed doors that are.
Yeah.
But when I go to places like LA or San Francisco, where there are a lot of people on the streets who are struggling with that, they do tend to be younger. But do the numbers show that they're all young, or is it a pretty widespread?
I don't want to directly speak with the numbers because somebody who knew the numbers better than me could dispute me. I can tell you what I actually see being at a facility. Age doesn't seem to be the greatest factor. In other words, do I see older heroin addicts? Yes. 40s, 50s, even 60s? Yes. Do we get more young people? Yes, we do, because they have a tendency to be more open with their getting around. They're more open with their homelessness because they're more physically able to handle that, whereas the older people get, the less they're able to tolerate the movements that it takes to live that lifestyle. So it's harder for them. So you do see more young people only because they're physically able to get around and tolerate that lifestyle a little easier. But as far as the need and the desire and usage, all over the board.
Touching into another area of kind of current events, I don't know if you heard about this, but recently, so Oregon has kind of been known as the state that permits a lot of drugs that are illegal in other states to be used. But recently they came out and said that they will start prosecuting people for carrying hard drugs like cocaine and heroin. Do you think that prosecuting these harder drugs is a step in the right direction? Or do you think it has no effect or a bad effect?
I don't think it will have any effect. People do use harder drugs, do them for very specific reasons. And the threat of getting in trouble is no worse than the threat to risking their life. So if someone thinks that they're worried about getting in trouble more than they're worried about risking their life, that's usually not the case. And the individuals who are worried about getting in trouble, they tend to be people who take less risks anyway. So that kind of evens out. Individuals who are worried about getting in trouble tend to be people that take less risks and tend to be people that are on the lower side of the usage spectrum anyway. So I think that's really a political thing. Do you want to remember, I spent a lot of time myself too working in corrections as a director of nurses in a correctional facility. And crime is a deterrent up to a certain point, but we always forget our people who want our public officials to do these type of things. They always kind of forget the back end. Sure, you can arrest them, but when you arrest them, They belong to you now. Okay? You got to feed them. You got to take care of them. You have to administrate them. And this is all an extra burden on society. So it's up to each individual electorate what they want to do. But it's not free. You know, it's not free. So you want to prosecute them, go ahead. I don't know how much you think you're doing to help the problem. I'm not 100% sure about that from what I see. But you know, that's a political issue if you want to arrest me. It's not free and it's not cheap.
Sure.
Okay.
So one thing, excuse me, one thing, Richard, that I think me and you have in common is that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is just kind of what I'm getting just from our conversation so far, is that the government can't fix your life, right? It comes down to the individual, which I think is kind of some of the essence of your program. So why don't we move to that? Why did you start Second Starts, and how have you seen it improve the lives? Just walk me through kind of the journey of how you got to that.
Well, my journey basically starts as when I first got into nursing, it was purely accidental, meaning that I was in the military, served the United States Air Force, and when I got out, I knew that I wanted to go to school. I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to pursue, but I knew I was going to get some education somehow. You know, I had got out and I wanted to finish my education. My intent was to be in our local community college in a glass blowing program. Believe it or not, I had a cousin who was a glass blower, and I got introduced to some opportunities to maybe get into some industrial glass blowing programs, and we had a fine one at the school. I enrolled. Everything was going fine till about 2 weeks. And then I was bumped from the program for an industrial student. And they told me, well, you could come back next semester. Well, I didn't want to wait till next semester. I was working in a glass factory and I was done with that. And I said, I'm going to school for something. Well, I have a family history of nursing, grandmother and mother at the time. I knew zero about what they did. I knew they were nurses. I had an idea that maybe they took people's temperatures or things of that nature, but then I never discussed it with them. Well, one thing led to another, and I ended up in the program, and that was about 37 years ago. During my time working in nursing, I spent most of my beginning years in more traditional geriatric type nursing. But during that time, I had a fascination with people like Tony Robbins and Les Brown and those kind of guys, you know, guys who talked about the entrepreneurial spirit and making yourself better. And it wasn't so much about the content. I was more enamored with the way they delivered their message and their overall what they were trying to do. So that went on in my nursing career, me basically looking at them, studying them, and like I say, not really too much worrying about trying to use their material to change myself. I was interested in what their attempts were and how they thought about changing other people. I was like very fascinated with their delivery and what they were trying to do. Well, soon after, well, not soon after, but maybe in about 2006, I would say, I moved to geriatric nursing to a correctional facility, okay? Went from a geriatric nurse to a correctional director of nurses like in one day, not knowing anything about corrections at all, you know, having to be taught everything by my LPNs and everything. And I was fascinated with watching human behavior. And I really took charge of working with the young people. I was in charge of watching over them, the juveniles and the post-juveniles. And I noticed some things that were going on, and I noticed that these individuals, when I would see them the first time, they had a certain attitude toward what was going on with them in their life. And I noticed that they were pliable. But I would also see these people, as I did it for 10 years, I would see these same individuals in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years on different arrests. And I'd noticed their total attitude change. I began to kind of delve into that and really break it down. It was a local community, so I could know some of them and I could know their families. And I really started in my mind developing a science to say, well, why is this individual so pliable and he seems like he has so much potential, and yet 3 or 4 years down the road I can see the same individual who is almost, you might deem, unsavable. And throughout my nursing career I just kind of dealt with that and looked at what was going on. And I went from, the system's terrible, like a lot of people do, and then I realized, being in the system, actually, the system's not terrible. It's more than just that. It was more than just the system being terrible, because the system is only going to be good, as you spoke of before. Government, the same as systems, they only have the power to do so much. There's got to be another way that we can increase the odds of how much we can help people. There's got to be a different way, So I just sort of started melding that together and just coming up and looking at individuals, talking to families. And that was the genesis of how I started to come up with this system, so.
Very cool. So tell me a little bit about Second Starts itself. Like, what is it? What kind of services does it provide? And and when did you start it?
Okay. The main thing about when I started Second Starts, what I wanted to do was introduce a theory of mine that it wasn't so much what we were doing wrong. It was more about the different disciplines not combining their efforts in the proper way. So in other words, one psychiatry may think one thing about it. The social workers will think another thing about it. To physicians and medical people, totally off on another tangent. Totally off, and everybody would come together and try to treat this individual. Well, as a registered nurse, we are the one group in that medical field who don't get a say. Everybody else treats and comes up with theories and this, that, and the other. We don't get a say. Our job is to pull it together. So I started saying, well, wait a minute. If my job is to pull it together, I would think of a better way to pull this thing together than the way you guys are doing it, And what Second Start wants to do is take the efforts of our practitioners, the feelings and concerns with our family, and bring them together in a way that multiplies our results. And that was tricky because when people normally deal with family members and the different things, the first thing practitioners and everybody want to do with doctors and all is they want to educate. Well, I realized that educating an 18-year-old about his drug use, it's cute and all, but it's going to have no effect on him hearing you, no effect on changing his life, no effect on changing directions whatsoever. Bringing family members in to educate them and tell them about, fentanyl does this to your body and it does that to your body. That doesn't move the needle at all in changing what needed to be changed. So how do we move the needle? What do we do? How do we do this? And from talking to a lot of people and a lot of family members, I realized that the more you talk about the disease, and I say disease being a debatable issue with some people one way or the other, the more you talk about it, family dynamics tend to multiply a guilt and shame quota that is detrimental to the fixing process. I also realized that practitioners' role in this is limited. Taking a person from an actual disease situation and turning him into a person who doesn't require drugs anymore it's almost possible for that to be clinical. Yet everyone uses a clinical approach. So Second Starts is, I like to tell everybody, this is a non-clinical option. Even though I like to deal with individuals who have had drug and alcohol abuse problems, or individuals who have been in trouble with the law, young individuals, 17 to 24 is usually the wheelhouse I like to stay in. I don't engage in telling them, well, don't do drugs. You can't do the drugs that are bad for you. We don't even bother with that. We love to have the practitioners who do that, let them do what they do. What Second Starts will do is now we take that individual and put him on a path to physically teach him how to change his life map, we call it. In other words, there's a certain set of subconscious beliefs that each and all of us have that make us run our day and run our life. And when we try to come off of that path, even for the better, doesn't make any difference. The map is the map. Your map may be okay. Another person's map may be very, cause a lot of injury to it. It doesn't matter. Your map is your map. And when you try to come away from that map, it causes anxiety, distress. And that's why it's very difficult to get people to change their lives. We try to teach them a way to physically, mentally, and structurally change that map in a very open way, not a gimmicky way. I found out that gimmicky, trying to trick you into changing your life, is a bad course. Because you need to understand from the get-go what you are attempting to do and what the road looks like ahead. So that's what Second Start does. We have a structured 90-day program, and I take the individual and the family, and I go with the individual. I reach them multiple times a day because we are burning a new pattern in. Once we burn that new pattern in, okay, we make it very clear that the things that I'm using in the program are not really what the program is about. I do have to teach you things like agency and ownership and how to take care of yourself. I do have to teach you about communication. I do have to teach you about organization and planning. And I have to teach you about how to prepare yourself for real world activities. But the crux of the program is teaching you a system that allows you to apply lifelong learning and keep that going. I like to show the young people this book. It's an incredible book. Not so much of what is in it, but the thought of it. It's called The 100-Year Lifestyle. What I try to impress upon them is that anyone who tells you that life doesn't go on day after day after day after day till you die, and it's a struggle for all of us, and the best thing for you to do is prepare for that struggle, they're lying to you. Gimmicks don't work. I can't pill you out of this, okay? I can't give you a 3-day class about ethics to get you out of this. It doesn't work. You need to change your the way you get up, the way you look at things, the way you apply perspective. So that's why we do it in 90 days, because we burn in a habit of life and a habit of living. For the parents, we do not believe in indulging them in that same program. What we do with the parents is now, while we're using that program, we indulge the parents in letting them know only technically how they're doing in the program. In other words, we believe in a system called immediate course correction. In other words, I tell the parent, this is our topic that we've done today, okay? We did today. And we had certain contact points, and there were certain things I asked the young person to do. What was their compliance? If we get good compliance, you are to congratulate them, give them praise, and that's all they need from you. Because the family dynamics are extremely difficult. This is what we have psychologists for, and this is why we have social workers. That is a long-term healing thing with any family dynamic. We see a lot of bad family dynamics, but we have a theory called deception of condition, and we talk about where you cannot get caught up in what your dynamic is, because that is only going to reduce the ability for you to heal and move on. Your long-term healing, we will put that in the hands of social workers. We'll put that in the hands of clinical people. And you will go on with those programs as long as it takes to heal that. That's fine. Separate that from actually how you're trying to change that life map. Do not let those two get mixed up, because when you do that, you slow the progress. So there's healing for professionals, and there's healing that you need to do yourself. And for your family, they need to observe and praise and be alarmed if you don't keep up with the program. But as far as dragging people in and giving people an opportunity to say, well, we were disappointed in you, or we go into it saying, hey, scrape all that to the side. We know everybody's disappointed. That's why we're here. Okay, let's not get mentally into that, because we know that. And anybody who lies to you about that and wants you to have all these feelings, that's for therapy. Do that separate. What we're doing here in Second Starts is we're giving you a second start. We're burning you a new life map, a new set of habits, and a new way to look at life, and a new way to install a lifelong learning mentality. So now, doesn't matter what I tell you, you are going to go on for the rest of your life gathering information anyway. That's what you're going to do. That's how you're going to live. And that's what Second Starts, in the essence of it, that's what it does.
Very cool. So I wanted to ask as well with that, Richard, what are maybe one or two, maybe let's just take your favorite. What's your favorite success that you've seen from this kind of, I don't know, treatment, I guess you could say?
Well, usually the successes that I see are, one would call subtle. No big necessary splash, but what we do get and what we do see is the young individuals that I followed with saying, when I get up in the morning, I got something else on my mind. Most young people, or people in general, who are abusing substance or getting into bad behaviors, no one ever stops. No one ever doesn't do what they want to do. Ever. They do what they want to do. They may not know why they want to do it, but they do what they want to do. We found that you need to get something else to do. That's all. You need to change it for something else, because you're going to do what you want to do. So we teach them how to take big goals and then ingrain them. So what I've seen is individuals say they cut down or stopped doing what they were doing because they had something else to do. I have young people who have went on and finished their schooling. Okay. And that's usually what I see. People move on into their schooling, or what they should have been doing anyway. Nothing crazy, but just the desire to get up and go listen to other people and what they tell them to do. They get up with a purpose now, because I've taught them how to build a purpose. And so any successes that I've seen have been subtle, but they have pretty much mostly included not needing to be a follower and not needing to blank their life out with something, because they create a life. And that's what I've seen. And I've seen it on, I would say, a regular basis. Usually the benefits to the family are this, and they may be a little superficial. The biggest problems I found with the families is that embarrassment, as much as it seems like it would be superficial, embarrassment is the biggest key. Embarrassment about their situation. Parents are embarrassed that one of their children has gone off in this direction, and they immediately want to blame themselves. Well, that embarrassment is so easily changed when the individual just comes to them one time and says, Mom, Dad, I got something else on my mind. I want to do something else. I want to do this. How about that school again? They change immediately from a parent or a family member that is in pain and embarrassed to one that is extremely proud. It is so easy to get family members proud. And that's one of the best things about it. It's so easy to make them proud. It doesn't take that much at all. All they got to do is see them turn the corner a little bit. They're like, oh my goodness gracious alive, we turned the corner. And once that positive reinforcement is given by the young person and met by the family member, it multiplies everything. Down the road, I've seen where families have told me, hey, one of the things we appreciated about this most is, guess what? We didn't have to go back we ain't been back to rehab since. That was $25,000. Okay? We ain't been back to rehab since. Okay, if nothing else. If you do nothing else, that's great. Okay. You know, Aaron went back to school. We didn't think it was ever going to happen. She was in such a bad crowd. Well, Aaron doesn't really look at the crowd that much anymore, because Aaron has a point and a mission now that we created with the big goal, and created the continuous learning, to where now Aaron wants to do this. Aaron wants to get back into art now, because Aaron's only got a more selfish mindset, and not a mindset that allows other people to have input, but a mindset that she's creating on a daily basis, creating that mindset. So once we do that, and we find that one of the biggest, let me tell you a quick story. I tell this story in one of my videos that I send to people, and it's a very simple story, and I call it the Sally Port story. And the reason why is because it's a place in the jail between the population and the outside. Usually a desk, you're sitting there, talk to your lawyers or whatever, small room. It's in between, a little port they call it. I found that when individuals come in there for their first time or second time, they're scared witless. They are willing to do whatever mom and dad say. Mom and dad would say, mop a floor with your lips. They were willing to do it, whatever, because they're scared and they're in trouble and they're in way a little deeper than they thought they were going to be. This time, it hit me that this is where we have our leverage, right here. Right here is where we have to take this little moment here as a slingshot, because this is when they're willing to listen. Now, we take that moment and we parlay that moment into some actual action. So I call it leverage-based tapered life management. It's a technical term for what I do. But we take that leverage. When young people see their parents and their people proud of them, that's worth more than money. And what we do is we take that pride part and we magnify that pride part, and we use that, we work on that. All they need is some pride. They don't really want you, the young people never really want you to come in and listen to me and see all the kind of drugs they were doing. And they don't necessarily need you to hear all the trouble they were in. They just want them to be proud of them. Well, we give their parents an opportunity to just be proud and express their pride. That's all they need to do. We can work on the other part. And that Sally Port story meant so much to me, because it's really exactly why I started. I saw one individual come to me, and later on I saw a different individual. And as I saw that person for the third or fourth time, you weren't able to get that light in their eyes anymore. They didn't care less and less about what their parents or somebody thought about them. So there was a window of opportunity. This is why I usually say, hey, first to second time arrests or perfect. First to second time rehabs or perfect. I would prefer prevention, but that's a hard sell. Very hard sell. Nobody wants to do hardly anything beforehand. That's my goal, is to turn this into a prevention service instead of a actual service where we actually work with the people. I think that it would be so enlightening prevention-wise. We just have to work on the leverage part of it, because until there's trouble, kids they're not listening a lot of times. But I found out that individuals who need to get bailed out, or individuals, even on the good part, want to go to school and want their parents to pay for it, we take that leverage that everybody has. Everybody wants something. That's a cynical view of life, but it's a true view of life. Even especially kids and parents, they got a dynamic. One's got something, the other one wants it. But there's an angst between them. Well, then when there's trouble, like in that Sally Port story, that angst goes away for the young person. It's like, all of a sudden, yeah, well, you know what? I love you. Can you come get me? We can take that and parlay that and start that right away, and right then get into it right then, and that it does wonders. I think it does wonders. So we try to multiply that need and that desire for help and taking care of it, and it definitely is a slingshot.
Early on, you mentioned that in addition to helping people with drugs, you also help people with alcoholism, which some people would consider a drug anyway. Have you seen in recent... What was that? Sorry?
There's no doubt. Definitely a drug.
So have you seen a recent rise in alcoholism as opposed to maybe, before this decade?
No rise or fall. It's always been there. Heavy. Always. Still is. A lot of people are using multiple use. It is not uncommon at all for someone to come in and say to me, I ask them, a certain thing I go over with them is, tell me the drugs, tell me what you're using, how long you've been using it, when you started, when's your last use. That's basically what we go through. And it is not uncommon at all to get heroin, benzodiazepines, and then alcohol. It's not uncommon to have all three at all. People have this tendency to think, well, they're doing one or the other. And we do have alcoholics that don't do anything but drink. But right now, so much polysubstance use, we call it, that I don't, for my purposes and my mindset, the differences they mean nothing. It's about what they're trying to do to themselves and why, because they don't physically have not created or know another direction. And that's what it is. Now, Second Starts is primarily a service for young people. Like I say, 17 to 24 is around there. The things that I'm saying now, once you get a certain age, I found out that a lot of that doesn't necessarily apply. Me tried to take this and talk to a 40-year-old about it. There's a certain period where the caring about what family members think begins to fade. You got a window there. And Second Starts exploits that window. After that, we need somebody else to come in and help with that, because that can be that's a thing. It's very difficult. Now you're talking about requiring a life-changing, altering, lightning in the desert type moment now to get somebody to turn around, because you need to leverage them, and the fear of death, sickness, illness, disease, it doesn't seem to be the greatest mover and shaker like you think it might be. You just tell them, yeah, you're getting ready to die, well, yeah, I'm getting a drink anyway. So that kind of thing is hard to tell. What changes those type of people is very difficult. But young people, you have an opportunity to leverage their concern about what their family and loved people think about them. And it's a big lever. It's a heavy lever. It can do a lot of heavy lifting, and it should be exploited in this mission.
So I think it's hard for anybody to listen to kind of this conversation and not think of someone that they know that could probably benefit from this. So I'll give you the opportunity right now, Richard. And I think there's a lot of people listening who feel the same way. If there's someone listening right now and they have, sons or daughters or nieces or nephews or even just friends that might benefit from this, how can they get in contact with you?
Okay. The first thing is I have a website. It's called secondstarts.com, and I spell it with the number 2, NDSTARTS.com. It's a general website. It's place to contact me. We look over a few of the things, and it's a good place to contact me. Email richardjones@secondstarts.com. I have a Facebook group, which they want to come in and look at. I'm going to start doing some more lives on there, just talking about some of the things and the program. The program has 3 therapeutic missions that we involve in it. We've got 3 forms of steps of delivery, and we have 7 principles that we work by. So if they come in and hear about some of that. But if they come to any of those places and just reach out, I'm happy to reach back. What I like to do is, the mission that I have is that I have a certain method that I believe we can work. My service provides and administrates that method for a family. But the nuts and bolts of what we're thinking and how we do it is far as I'm concerned, that's totally free. So if somebody reaches out to me and they don't want to avail themselves of the payment part of the program, the nuts and bolts of what I want to do, I still want to talk to them. I still want to create a little care plan for them, give it to them, and let them know exactly what we're doing. Because I think it's more important that we do that. I'm going to help some families because they want that administration part. But the information on what we think and the drive and the theory behind it, I definitely want to talk to them, and I want to create a plan for them anyway. Secondly, what's most important to me is to understand that one of the things that I want to use this word despised because it burns me up. The financial mistreatment of people that are doing this. The rehabs will take tens of thousands of dollars for treatment that literally, I wouldn't say doesn't have a prayer working, because anything can work. But the way that our system does this now, it's set up. It's set up for relapse, okay? It's set up for relapse. And it's not that they're not trying, but it's a system that almost has no choice. It's set up for relapse. And that bothers me a lot. With our program, what we do is the program moves in pieces. So as the program moves, is as you are financially responsible. In other words, whatever we do at a certain point, the family has said to me, hey, I like what we're doing. This is working for us. We're willing to go forward. If something happens to where it's not working for them and it doesn't seem a viable option for them, because nothing works for everybody. That's just in this game, it doesn't work like that. But then no more responsibility. In other words, I do not like the fact that you take a lump sum from somebody and then say, well, now it's on you. In other words, I do not like putting the onus on the parents or the family. The onus is on Second Starts. In other words, we have to provide you results that you can live with and feel as though it is helping your family. And I think that we wanted to really, that's financially acceptable. In other words, what am I getting for this? I've seen so many times where families have dropped down $10, $15, $20, $30,000 for 30 days of treatment. And they got back a person who only met some new people that they knew to call to get drugs. That's what they did for $30,000, and it's heartbreaking, but it happens all the time. So if a family member talks to me, I love to talk to them. We spend a little time just find about their situation, and we'll do what we can do for them. But if we can't do anything else, we can impart some knowledge. So secondstarts.com, there's a contact place at the top of the site where you can book a call, 15-minute call, just to have a look-see and talk about your situation. And the Facebook group is called Parenting Your Child in Recovery. It's basically what we call the program. So anytime, we're happy to talk to anyone in this situation. Usually between the ages of 17 at the low end, some 16-year-olds. I've done 16-year-olds. It's up to the family how that works. But 17 is a greater spot because they're starting to really get an idea of their own maturity. And that's very necessary here. And then when you start getting past 24, 25, you're starting to get out of that point where they're feeling this type of leveraged life management. So somewhere in there. But I'm happy to talk to anyone who's having those type of issues. And my history is substance abuse nurse currently. And I spent 10 years as a director of nurses in a correctional facility, actually working and talking to families and kind of building this thing from actual experience. So
amazing. Richard Jones, everybody, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you so much, Josh.